And even if you went into India, and the Westerners have a hard time understanding this religion, which is formatted in a different way for a different mentality. Hindus themselves can somehow reconcile all their inconsistencies in the religion, all the opposing stories. They can reconcile all that, and to them it makes sense. It gives them a worldview. But it was made by other people, not for it wasn't purpose made just for the individual. It was made for them all by other people long ago. Now, when people start breaking out of the matrix, at least coming to the stage where they want to jump off the floor, the bottom floor, in the bottom room, because they've been trained to look for order, an order around them, they bring into the next phase the need for that with them. So they look for something that has a similar set of rules, regulations, similar to their old religion, the one that gave them all of their answers until they grew up. But they still want order, so they join something else. Some people who need the group mentality so badly will join even more fundamental orders, where they're far stricter, with more rules, they're more dogmatic, and preachers scream at them. And generally when someone screams at you, that means you're receiving abuse. And that's what it is, it's abuse. Why preachers have to scream when there's a microphone in front of their face, well, you can figure that out. It's because those who attend have grown up generally, and they've been abused. Their minds, if nothing else, have been abused by screaming to overpower, to terrify them with the wrath of God. In India, someone can die at the side of the road, and no one goes to help them. The reason being, if you interfere with their karma, their fate, again, the fate part, then it might rub off on you. So they chose to be poor, they chose to die, they chose to starve to death, and you don't lift a finger to help. Each religion has been formatted for a different culture, different people, a different mentality. In China, the ancient religions dwelt an awful lot on fate again, but also on luck. And some of the biggest gamblers in the world today are Chinese. And that whole idea of luck being a type of force that comes and goes, a will-o'-the-wisp, which sometimes you could predict if you do certain things. You see, this is all the nonsense they go into. They can actually hit the jackpot once in a while. Tremendous gamblers. In the West, because Rome itself was a continuation of the Roman Empire, the pre-Christian Roman Empire. It ruled the ancient world. And into the religious empire, this transitory period, they didn't start afresh and say, well, we've got to understand how people work, how the mind works. They didn't do any of that. They didn't have to, because they had the archives that they'd been given from their predecessors of an old empire, and those were the Greeks. And many of the higher elite classes of ancient Rome were descended from the Greeks who ran ancient Greece. They had all of the advisors around them when they went through the transitory phase from the old Rome with its armies, empire, to the religious empire. And so they knew how to control populations. They knew the need for psychology, mass psychology, and most of all, they knew the need for control purposes of a religion. And that is why a particular religion was chosen. One of the better religions that have been done so far, where the people were more obedient than ever to the heads of those religions, who also were emperors of the empire. Prior to that, they had occasional revolutions, pre-Christian Rome, because there were so many gods to choose from, and there was always the element that one god or another could favor the individual on his quest for dominance over the rest. Whereas Christianity came along, and a pope was ordained by God, and what he said was really like God speaking, and you couldn't argue with it. There's no other way to come at and usurp that power except going through the same means. And sometimes in history there were two popes on the go, conflicting popes. France, when they lived in France, and the Vaticans were really there, we find there was one pope and what they called the anti-pope, and they used to excommunicate each other regularly and throw these curses on each other. And that's how farcical it got, because at that time the general public were so trained in the whole idea of this pyramid structure of Catholicism that the only way to usurp the power was to appear to be ordained by God. So you either cross your fingers and hope the previous or the present pope would die, because they didn't abdicate generally, or by some miracle you would take his place, because the public had to accept the tradition that had come across of how you became pope. We know it was corrupt as could be, and you always find corruption at the top of all the religions, because they never follow the religion they impose upon the people. And today it's a world club of religious leaders that run the show. They understand the necessity of religion. Michael Gorbachev has written about it, a man who's an atheist and ex-head of the Soviet Union. He's the one who talks about the creation of an earth religion, an earth worship type religion would be necessary to bring in this new order. So they've never ever poo-pooed the idea of religion, far from it. They use religion. If we even look at the previous Soviet regime and communism in itself, it had all the earmarks of a religion, and just as intolerant against anyone who complained about it or questioned it. And it had its dogma, and it had all its ritualistic parades and its hierarchies, and you might call them their priests, the ones who would bring people in to question them, to see if they'd right think or wrong think. So most people crave a religion which is accepted by others, a peer group, in order to get through life. And down through the ages, the big boys, when necessary, have agreed amongst themselves to stir up trouble. Trouble makes progress happen, you see. Progress. It also helps the bankers, because they will always finance both sides in wars. And the tremendous religious wars that went on through the centuries were just incredible. Sometimes where peoples who were of the same stock and who had opposing religions imposed upon them, which they'd adopted, would slaughter each other for years. Now this game of divide and conquer is as old as the hills, and we see it being used today. When tremendous changes are taking place, different groups are encouraged to look at other groups, and they're all fighting each other as the ship goes down. The big changes are coming in that will affect them all. They become oblivious to that. They focus on one thing. It's those guys. Those guys are the problem. It's like a whirlpool going round and round and round and sucking down in the middle, and everyone is choking each other and throttling each other as they go round in this whirlpool, never knowing how they got there, what they're there for in the first place, or who's orchestrated this. The targets that occupy a lot of people's minds are the Mexicans and Latin Americans coming up into the United States. The cause is ignored, because it's the cause you'd have to question. It's the funding, it's the institutions funded in the United States that fund these groups to start coming across en masse, because this is the time it was supposed to happen. The boys who run the world run by a schedule, a time schedule, and they have 5-year plans for one particular part, 10 for another, 50 for another, 100 years for another. Same as communism, same as the United Nations, because it's all the same group at the top. Now, as I've said already, the mass man, humanity, can go two ways, and this whole movement towards the mass population, the mass man, also was recognized at the beginning of the industrial era, where they started for the first time talking about the masses. Before that, when it was a feudal system, they just talked about the herd, but then it became the masses. And you got mass movements. And there are two ways they can go today. Since most of them are not original people themselves, by that I mean they're not individuals at all. The knowledge they have has been marketed into them, projected into them. That is the reality. But they crave belonging so badly. And because of this belonging and this sadomasochistic tendency they tend to have, where they worship power stronger than themselves, and they love rules, they will obey rules, and they become automatons, robot-like, well-behaved, placid, Sovietized type citizens. This ties in fact, it gives me the picture of when Eleanor Roosevelt was over in the Soviet Union, where she said in her own writings, her first stop was to see Pavlov, her hero. Now Pavlov, who used all kinds of motivational behavior modifications through rather nasty techniques, was also in charge of implementing all of his research and using it on school children throughout the Soviet Union. And Eleanor was just so enthralled to see all the children walking quietly, well-behaved towards the school. She said there's no spontaneity and laughing and giggling like that they have in American schools, but my, they're so well-behaved. So being an authoritarian herself, and possibly a sadist, she approved of this. This turned her on. The fact there was no spontaneity of any individual appealed to her nature of creating the mass man, predictable people.